Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third and final edition of our three-part webinar series, Exploring Japan's Best-Kept Secrets. This time, we'll be taking a deep dive into the world of Japanese ceramic art. I'm Aki Nakanishi. I'm the director of Japan Institute and Arlene Schnitzer Curator of Culture, Art, and Education at Portland Japanese Garden. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful, actually, even for me. But thank you so very much for tuning in to spend your Friday with us as we unpack the mastery of Japanese crafts, led by our friend Steve Beimel of Japan Crafts 21, joining us right from the cultural capital of Japan, that's Kyoto. Again, in this iteration, just to make things a little bit more exciting, I'm speaking to you live, not from our home city of Portland, but rather from Cambridge, England, as I set out to put this program in perspective before turning this over to Steve, who's sitting on the other side of the planet, actually. Just incredible how technology enables us to do, all sorts of different kind of things these days, linking three different locations, Portland, Cambridge, and of course, Kyoto. And you guessed right. It is actually just past 1 a.m. in Cambridge. So I guess this time again, people tuning in from the US West Coast are having the best viewing experience, I think, as far as time is concerned. Anyway, for those who've been kind enough to tune in the past couple of times, I'm sure by now you are in full agreement with me when I say that Japanese crafts inspire imagination because they go beyond mere aesthetics. They connect people to culture, they connect people to mindfulness, and they connect people to a timeless appreciation for the art of making. So with that firmly in mind, I'd like to wrap up my part with just a couple of housekeeping notes here. One is that we will have time for Q&A towards the end of the program. So you can either ask your questions then, or you are welcome to use the chat box at the bottom of the very screen in front of you to post your questions as we go along. Second thing is that this video will be recorded for later sharing and viewing upon Portland Japanese Garden's YouTube channel in roughly around a couple of weeks' time. And that will be especially useful if you'd like to share the video with anyone or go back to any part of the content later on. So with that, I'd like to get the ball rolling by presenting one of the most revered Western speakers on Japanese culture and traditional craftsmanship, our very own comrade, Mr. Steve Beimel. Please take it away.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I hope I can live up to even a little bit of that. So welcome to all of you. I'm very excited to be with you today. And I'm going to go right into my slides. So we are Japan Craft 21, and an organization dedicated to saving the master crafts of Japan. When I say master crafts, I mean crafts which have been passed down from generation to generation, hundreds and sometimes even over 1,000 years. And of course, crafts like that exist in every culture. But I venture to say that if you take most of the master crafts around the world and you put them on the right side of the scale, Japan will have more than, at least as much as the whole world combined. But when you look at the present condition of the craft world in Japan, in 1979, there were 300,000 master craftsmen working in Japan. We move forward to 2028, 4 years from now, we estimate there'll be 20,000 left. At this point, there are about 50,000, and about half of them are my age. And so we think that there'll be about 20,000 practicing the next 4 years. That means it's a 92% decrease in the world's greatest powerhouse of craftsmanship. So we've started a program where we do research. We look for problems and we try and find solutions. There was no research being done on a massive scale, so we decided to do that. So we have a research program where we identify crafts. We we realized that there were no young carpenters being trained in joinery anymore in Japan. So we started a school to train young working carpenters in joinery. We started an apprentice program to save the extraordinary dye culture, the textile dye culture in Kyoto. We have four amazing young dyers who are in their 30s, who we pay their room and board so they can train with 10 master dyers in their 70s, 80s, and 90s to pass that on to the next generation and find markets for that. We do monthly, we do a social media to show the world that Japan is a powerhouse and we all need to at least be aware of it. And we have frequent presentations like the one we're seeing today online to share this master culture. Then we have a contest every year where we identify 6 to 10 extraordinary young craftspeople with great ideas, with passion, with talent, and we fund them in all kinds of projects. We now have 36 people in this program so that they can support each other. We can support themselves. It's an incredible support group. And to be able to show the world works like this, that our people are producing, so just to get the word out. So that's our mission, to identify problems, create strategies, and to take actions. And today is very much on purpose with our mission. Exploring Japanese ceramics. I was joking with Aki a few minutes ago, and I said the title should really be an extreme oversimplification of Japanese ceramics, because what I'm showing you today is I'm going to show you tons of slides of many, many different genres. But if you think about it, I'm just showing you a tiny snippet of what is available out there. It's really, well, as you'll see, after today, just realize that what you saw was just the beginning. And I hope this, for those of you who are new to Japanese ceramics, it will be an invitation to explore more. And we hope to do that with you together in the future. As a review, we looked at 3 main kinds of ceramics in general. There's earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain. Earthenware is very fragile, and these are particles of clay, and when they're fired, they fuse together, and they fuse together pretty well, but they're not really. It's fragile. It's not really fused. But if you raise the temperature to 1200 degrees, you see how each particle somewhat melts into the next particle. So it's very durable. But if you change the clay to a porcelain clay, which is very tight, very fine grained clay, and you add another 50 to 100 degrees, it just becomes a solid mass. That's why porcelain is very durable and you can have very thin walls. So those are the 3 kinds of ceramics we'll be speaking about today. Another topic which is actually not explained very often. We often hear the word reduction firing, but what does that mean? Basically, if you reduce the oxygen in the kiln, there's more of a chance of getting gray, blue, and blacks. If we increase the oxygen, we have more of a chance of getting pink and orange. Japan is one of the 2 oldest ceramic countries, producers in the world, China and Japan. Japan has been producing ceramics for 12,000 years. And I'm just fast forwarding, if you could call this fast forwarding, to 3500 BC, where works like this in the Jomon period were commonly produced, and each clan or each part of a clan would have their own designs. So it was one of the most creative, exuberant times for ceramics in the prehistoric world. The Yayoi period came 300 BC, and this is when there was a large outpouring of migrants from China through Southeast Asia, up through Taiwan, through the Ryukyu Islands, and into Japan. And this was a time of where the wet rice culture was introduced in Japan, and Japan stopped being semi-nomadic, and they began to have sedentary communities, and this is when they began the next phase of their ceramic history. And this is very much continental style ceramics. And what these were technically improved from before, the design, but the design is definitely much, much simpler than the previous era. Now, all these earthenware pots that we have seen and we will be seeing were fired in pits in the ground. So they could only get to 800 or 900 degrees. This is Haniwa is the next genre I would like to speak about. And these are earthenware pieces, and these were hollow funerary objects. You would find these buried in tombs or exposed on these tumulus grave sites. And these were a little bit scary, and they kept people away. It kept people from going into the graves. It had this kind of an otherworldly feel about them, and playing upon people's superstition, they were able to use these. And these are everywhere in Japan. They have found these in great numbers and great varieties: cats and houses and dogs and horses and all kinds of things. Now, Japan takes a big leap forward with sueki ware, and this is when the tunnel kiln was brought to Japan. Actually, it was brought to the Osaka area, what is now Osaka, by Korean potters in the 400s. And at this time, they began to choose clays for heat resistance. Certain clays have greater heat resistance. They started to use the potter's wheel in a limited way. And so we see the sueki ware for several hundred years being made in Japan. This is a piece from the Tang Dynasty in China in the 700s, 700s, where was the Tang Dynasty. Tang Dynasty was one of the greatest civilizations in the history of mankind, and a great influence on Japan during the 5, 6, 700s. And so you see this same kind of motif being made in Nara in the 700s, still in earthenware. Sanage ware is another advancement, this using the tunnel kiln. Again, these were high-fired pieces. And this was in the area, if you see where Nagoya is right now, just to the right of that in the Higashiyama district of Nagoya, they began these functional kilns. These are industrial kilns making products for farmers and for light industry, cottage industry. And these were inspired by imported Korean works. And this is the earliest glazed work in Japan. And so the Sanage ware inspired the 6 old kilns. We often hear about the 6 old kilns. These are 6 kilns which are all throughout central or western Japan. And they're still functioning to this day, 800-900 years later. And they fired to about 1250 degrees, and they were tunnel kilns, and they fired the kilns were very large, so they had to fire for a long time. One interesting thing is if you have glaze, you can fire for just a day or two. But if you have unglazed works, you have to fire for a long time because it takes a long time for the surface to seal without a glaze. And we'll talk about this as we go through. So the first area, so we moved down from Nagoya to Tokoname. And Tokoname produced these kinds of works where farmers would store seeds in them. Indigo dyers would use them as vats. And these were not produced for their ornamental effect, yet they did have ornamental kind of side effects, so to speak. So we have Tokoname, we have Bizen. Bizen is to this day, it's probably the largest, most extraordinary group of potters in one area functioning in Japan to this day, 800 years later. We have Tamba, which is near Kyoto, near Kobe. Echizen on the west side of the island of Honshu. Shigaraki, which is outside of Kyoto. And you can see at the top here, on the lid, on the lip, on the left side, this is a kintsugi repair. So I understand that you have an exhibition concerning kintsugi. It's an extraordinary technique. And then Iga, which is not one of the main kilns, but 6 kilns, but we added it on. It's very close to Shigaraki, and it has its own flavor. So Sanage ware, and then there's Seto. Seto is of the 6 kilns, it's the only one that uses glazes. And it was located very near Nagoya again, and we see works like this in Koseto. Then moving fast forward to the end of the 1500s, Sen no Rikyu, my absolute idol of all times. He was a great tea master of the late 1500s. He was the person who codified the tea ceremony as we know it today. It's actually not called tea ceremony in Japanese, but for lack of a better English word, or the way of tea. He created a residential aesthetic for architecture. He created Sukiya-style architecture. He had a huge influence on garden design. He was the one who introduced kaiseki cuisine with focusing on food presentation. And he was the one who created a golden age of ceramics in the late 1500s, of metal art, of bamboo work, of lacquer, calligraphy. He's the one who made the term wabi-sabi famous. He introduced a kind of ikebana for tea, a very, very simple, understated ikebana. He was the one who spoke about understated beauty, patina, rusticity, natural beauty. He was the man for all seasons. And the fact that almost no one in the world except for Japan has ever heard of him is always surprising to me. But what he did, he had 3,000 students of the upper level feudal lords and samurai in Japan. And up until his time, the Japanese upper class loved Chinese celadon, loved perfect Chinese ceramics, and he expanded that palette to include raku, and he invented raku. And raku is so different from the perfect celadon bowl. It's lumpy, it's drippy, it's asymmetrical, but when you hold it, you can feel the fingerprints of where the artist, the craftsperson had manipulated the bowl. And its beauty grows every day. It's not static. And so we see the birth of raku. It's very fragile. It's earthenware. And the second generation, his son created red raku and white raku, which are all still used today. And 15 generations later, raku Jikinyu 15th in the same family is producing rakuware of just 21st century sensibilities, a true artist. Honami Koetsu was a poet. He was an artist, a calligrapher in the early 1600s. And he studied, one of the things he did is studied with the 3rd generation raku. And he came up with these bowls, which are all national treasures of Japan today. Shigaraki, what Sen no Rikyu did was not only did he create the raku bowl, but he felt he was in love with the functional ware of these 6 old kilns. And he went to Shigaraki and he had teaware commissioned from these industrial kilns. It was unheard of to go to an industrial kiln and have teaware made, but he was that man for all seasons. So if you notice on this piece is placed in the kiln. The clay itself, it was very pale beige, but there was nothing added to this. Nothing was applied to this piece everything you're seeing is the result of the action of the kiln itself. So the red part here are the scorch marks from the fire, and this delicious oozing of golden green dripping down the side, that comes from the ash itself, which from the wood, which reacts with the clay, and it turns green and it drips down, becomes glaze or glass. So a very simplified vision of a tunnel kiln. I'm showing you 5 variations of what you can do in a tunnel kiln. There are probably 500 variations of every area of this kiln will have a slightly different effect, and some greatly different. So if we look at the innermost part, you see very pale pieces, and when you get closer to the fire, you get these kiln effects. So this would be the innermost part. You can see here where my cursor is. The color of the clay is this pale color, and the fire, the flames can't reach in its full entirety to the edge of the kiln, the end of the kiln. So the pieces are paler. So you have this pale reddish color. And you see all these tiny white dots. These are bits of feldspar, which are pebbles which are in the clay, which they keep in the clay, and they explode upon firing and form this wonderful texture. Now, going a little closer, you notice that the color's darker, and you can see here's a good example of the color of the original clay. So there's a resist technique that's used here. The craftsperson, the potter, will place 2 very brittle ceramic discs, clay discs, on these 2 places. When it's fired and they're removed, you have this beautiful motif. Getting closer to the fire, it's darker red. But you notice in the front here, there's this very interesting focal point for this cold water jar. And this is achieved by placing a smaller piece, such as a tea bowl, right in front of there. And when the flames are moving in one direction from the fire towards the work, this tea bowl blocks it. And when it's fired and it's removed, you have this great focal point, which would be placed in a tea room so that this is the most visible thing that you see when you walk into the tea room. If you notice that these are seashell impressions. So that tells us that this piece was on the bottom of the kiln. It was on its side, so it wouldn't stick to the floor of the kiln. They placed seashells there. And on the bottom of the kiln, the ash accumulates, it encrusts upon the surface, and you get this wonderful texture. This is a very complex piece. You notice that there are these drippings of glaze or glass called dragonfly eyes. And then you also see another hint would be the seashells. So if we look at how this was placed in the kiln, it was placed on its side, and the ash flew through the kiln, and it dropped in this area, and it accumulated, and then it started to drip down in riverlets and to create a masterpiece like this. Something like this can only be done in the front of the kiln, right next to the wood burning. And that's a place where you get extraordinary coincidences, and where nature can add its own point of view. And at the same time, you get a lot of damage in that part of the kiln. And this piece was also right in the front. So on the left side, you get this very rich green dripping from the ash. On the right side, it was buried up to the side, so the ash encrusted on the side. Another complex piece. Iga is located just a few miles east of Shigaraki. And it's interesting that depending on the clay of a region, when you put pieces in a tunnel kiln, it's just fire, and it's just fire from red pine. And each area's clay has a different chemical makeup. So if in Iga, the chemical reaction between the red pine and the clay will turn a deep green. In Shigaraki, it's a light green, and we'll see later in Bizen, it's a creamy sesame color. So nothing was, again, I repeat, nothing was coated on this piece. When it's placed in the kiln, it was just this beige piece of ceramic, raw ceramic shape. And all this happened because in that one part of the kiln, you get this kind of kiln effect. Tamba is the area near Kobe, and there's an area called Tachikui. There are about 45 different potters on a street, one after another. I highly recommend going there for the experience. One of the greatest is Nishihata Tadashi, and he infuses his work with the sensibility of the 800-year-old kiln. So you have that feeling of the same coloring, yet he adds his own creative sensibility to it. You notice that about a third of this bowl is not coated with glaze. He does use glazes, but he lets the original Tamba feel come through, as he did at the bottom of this piece. Ichino Masahiko is one of his neighbors, one of Nishihata's neighbors, one of the great potters. You see there's an SS at the bottom here. This means superstar. He's also a superstar, and he likes to allow some of the original color of the clay of traditional tambayaki to show through. So it's just untreated, unglazed. Bizen, I understand that you're having an exhibition upcoming on Bizen. Bizen is an extraordinary area for ceramics. And you can see here on this bowl, that which is dripping down is not light green or dark green. It is this golden color called sesame. And this is one of the famous points of Bizen. So when you go to the exhibition, look for this dripping golden color, because it's only available in the front of the kiln where the wood is being fired. Here's another example of how those by placing brittle discs of ceramic on a piece, it becomes the resist. But notice how for Shigaraki ware, when you remove the disc, it was a very light color. You can see here that it's a very dark color because the color of clay, most of the clay used in Bizen is dark. It comes from rice paddies. Blue Bizen is a very unusual item in Bizen. And so when you have a high reduction of oxygen, that creamy part that's dripping down is blue. And if you have a moderate reduction of oxygen, it turns a kind of a beige or brown. Here's another very complex Bizen piece. So this has three different points. It has the golden sesame, it has the scorch marks, and you see here, this part here, it's silvery gray. This part was buried next to the side of the kiln. There was very little of the oxygen could get to that. There was a chemical reaction, and it turns this color. It's called sangiri, and it's a very difficult to attain but very beautiful effect. Originally in Bizen, they would wrap ceramics with rice straw. When they have these large communal kilns, they didn't want the pieces to stick together because they would fuse together. So wrap it in rice straw to keep the pieces in these large communal kilns separate. But the rice became burnished into the surface, and people loved the way that looked, and Sen no Rikyū loved the way that looked. So teaware often will have these marks on them. Now you notice here that the top is light with the burnished rice straw, but the bottom is from the natural effects of the kiln, of the wood ash. And so there's a technique where you place another pot on top of this. This becomes the resist, and when it's removed, you have this wonderful contrast. You'll often see this with vases or sake flasks. So yes, and sake flasks are pretty reasonably priced as a rule. So it's a great way to begin collecting. Hagi is another area which came about, was born because of the influence of Sen no Rikyu. They have climbing kilns, and from the early 1600s is stoneware, and it's in this area on the other side of Hiroshima. What happened was Sen no Rikyu, not only did he fall in love with the industrial kilns of the 6th grade kilns, but he fell in love with the natural, very humble, warm ceramics of Korean folkware. This was a rice, originally intended as a rice bowl for peasants in Korea, and Rikyu would import these and use them as tea bowls in the highest level of Japanese society, which was the tea room. And this gave birth to Hagi. And Hagi is a 400-year-old kiln town, which is one of my very favorites. Of course, I have so many favorites. I'm in trouble sometimes, but it's Hagi ware is known for its warmth and its softness. And there are two kinds of glazes in Hagi, two basic kinds. You have opaque and you have translucent. Opaque glaze is rice straw ash, and it's creamy. Translucent glaze is half wood ash and half feldspar. So this is translucent, and you'll see the color of the clay at the bottom is this loquat, this pinkish color. And when it's covered with that translucent glaze, that color from beneath shows through. So it's a very direct image. Here is another example of Hagi. Now, these are very inexpensive cups, teacups. You'll notice first that there's a crackling in the surface. Crackling is achieved when the potter has a fast cooling of the works, when he cools the kiln quickly. If you cool the kiln slowly, there are no crackles because the clay body and the glaze cool at different rates. The second thing to notice is this was dipped, the piece was picked up upside down, dipped into a translucent glaze, and then it was dipped again 1/3 of the way. So what you see here is a double dip, which becomes opaque in that process. Miwa Kyusetsu, he and his 3 brothers, they trace their lineage back to the original Korean potters who started, one of the original potters who started Hagi 400 years ago. And he created this Oni Hagi about 20 years ago. It's called Devil's Hagi. It's a very, very gritty clay, sandy clay, and he uses a very thick white rice ash. And because it's so thick, it kind of shrinks in the firing process to expose the color of the clay beneath. Kaneta Masanao is another very prominent potter in the area. His family's been there since the 1800s. He's the 8th generation. He's a sculptor. He scoops this out to create the bowl. He doesn't use a wheel. It's a very sculptured piece, and the pink is achieved by using the creamy rice ash glaze in a high oxygen environment. I think many of you heard the word slip. Just to review, slip is clay mixed with water, and it forms a soupy consistency, and you could pour it into molds for production ware, or you could coat it on the body of a piece of a body of a pot. And so, for example, in Gohonte, this is a pot which has been coated with slip and then coated with translucent glaze and put in a low oxygen environment, which sucks the iron out of the piece, creating these pink marks. Here you see this thick rice ash glaze dripping down over the unexposed, over the exposed clay at the bottom, and it's just this rich strawberry ice cream effect. It's a very typical Hagi feel. So Karatsu is another kiln, another Korean-based, Korean-influenced kiln which was favored by Sen no Rikyu. And that's located way down in Kyushu. So there are about 8 or 9 basic styles of karatsu ware. One is called egaratsu. It's hand decorated. They use a brush, dipping the brush in iron oxide to do these very simple paintings. Chosen karatsu, this is a Korean style where you have a dark iron glaze at the bottom, and you just dip the top of this piece in white rice straw glaze, and then turn it right side up, and it just drips down. Another ancient Korean technique is called hakeme, and they do this in both hagi and karatsu. You dip the brush in slip, and you just very spontaneously slap it on, and it has a lot of life, movement, and freedom and vitality. One more Korean style would be mishima, where you make a small stamp, and you stamp it into the piece when it's leather hard before it's fired, and you make incisions, and you fill it with this wonderful slip. And madara is where you coat rice straw glaze over rough clay, very rough clay, and what happens is the blue and black spots appear on the surface. That's when the base material dissolves and the iron spots come out. Furuto Oribe was the second great tea master after Sen no Rikyu, and he was a samurai. He was a great tea connoisseur, tea master, and one of the greatest, let's say, aesthetic influencers of all time after Rikyu. And he was in the Mino area, which is not too far from Nagoya, in that whole general area. And he favored about six or seven different kinds of ceramics. So he's in this area. And so Mino is located not that far from Nagoya. And it's a whole district. It was a feudal fief at one time. One of them, his favored styles, is kiseto, which is it's a low iron glaze, and it has this green copper as an accent. Here's a contemporary piece. Setoguro is very much like black raku. The piece is pulled out of the kiln when it's at 800 degrees. When it's red hot like a coal, it's dipped into water and it turns black. So it's basically a raku style. Oribe the Oribe style was named after Furuto Oribe, and these are dishes for food presentation, vegetables in the kaiseki part of a tea ceremony. And Oribe is known for its gorgeous green. And it's very playful designs that are just very spontaneously, almost childlike quality. Remember, this is in the early 1600s. So this is, they had the ability to make very specific, very perfect designs, but they chose this spontaneous design. It was a very modern sensibility for sure. So you'll see Oribe pieces have great shapes. There'll be baskets and bridges and boats and flower shapes to serve food in. Contemporary Oribe. So this is very simple. It's the same colors, but it's in a very simple, modern presentation, minimalist. Cold water jar. This is a vase. Suzuki Tetsu is the son of a living national treasure, specializing in Shino ware, which we're going to be talking about in a second. Black Kuro Oribe is, these are tea bowls, again, from the early 1600s. With it, it's an extraordinary sensibility when you're looking at the vitality, the creativity. So this is referred to as datsuzoku. unbounded by convention, free and spontaneous. It's a great aesthetic ideal. So shinoware, which I just mentioned, is created when you coat the vessel in an iron-rich slip, and then you do some scraping off and you do some faceting, some shaping, and then you coat it with feldspar. And when it's fired, if it's low oxygen, it'll turn bluish gray, and if it's high oxygen, it will turn pink or orange. Kobo Rienshu was the third great tea master, and he had many favorites. He had 6 kilns, which he was favoring. We're going to speak about just one, which is Takatori. He uses this rice straw, luscious glaze. And pieces from that district are still being made today, all one-of-a-kind pieces for special tea events. Interesting thing, in the year, right around the year 1600, everyone stopped using the tunnel kiln. The whole country stopped, and they adopted the Korean climbing kiln. And the reason they did it was it was much more practical. There was less damage in the kiln. It was how shall I say, it was much more economic, used a lot less wood. So everyone stopped using it. But unfortunately, what happened was when you gain control, you lose the possibility of incredible coincidences happening. But this was perfect for porcelain, because in porcelain, you have to have control. And porcelain came late to Japan, the early 1600s. It was mostly in the beginning focused on this area in Kyushu, right around Saga. It was about 800 or 900 years after the Chinese were making porcelain. The reason why the Japanese were late was because they didn't have porcelain clay. They didn't find it until that time. So they began to use porcelain, which is this pure white ceramic, and it became the perfect canvas for all kinds of creativity. So first they make the shape, and then they fire it at 800 degrees, a bisque fire. And then the potter will draw an outline of everything he or she wants on the piece, and then that's filled in with cobalt. And then the glaze hasn't been placed on here. This is the underglaze. So under the glaze, they do this coloring, and then they put a translucent glaze, and they fire it at 1300 degrees. And so the underglaze is blue on this piece. But the pink, this pink color, it's orange pink, is the overglaze, and it's done with enamel. And enamel is not something you buy at Home Depot for $10. Enamel is made from glass, and it's ground beyond talcum powder consistency. And it's painted on the surface, and then it's fired at 800 degrees. And then if you want gold, you apply it at that point, and then you fire that at 600 degrees. So voila, you have this piece, which a very complex piece, very difficult to produce, 4 firings at least. Blue and white became popular in the early 1600s. In Imari, the Kakiemon family produced this beautiful reddish color. And to this day, 15 generations later, they're still making it in the same family. So Imari ware is pretty well known in the West. A lot of it was exported, especially during the Meiji period. The Japanese themselves were making, the high-level samurai were making nabeshima ware, which they made as gifts for each other. So nabeshima ware is very rarefied, valuable pieces. So what happened was the Chinese, because between the Qing dynasty, the Ming and the Qing dynasty, they stopped exporting. And so this gave the Japanese a chance to export to Europe. And then the Europeans started making their own. They started copying the Japanese and the Chinese. So that's Delft in the Dutch and Meissen in Germany. And the English have Derby and Bow. And it's in France. There were about a dozen kilns throughout Europe making these blue and white pieces. Now, when I say celadon, what color comes to your mind? Well, there are actually many colors of celadon. And it all depends on the amount of glaze the amount of the iron in the glaze. More iron is more olive, less iron is green, or even less is blue, and with well-timed reduction of oxygen. And so you can look at glass. Glass has a little bit of green in it, and if you put 5-6 layers of glass, you'll see how that green accumulates. And that's the same thing that happens with celadon. The more coats you get, the deeper it gets, or the thicker the glaze, the deeper it gets. Here's a piece produced in the 1600s in Japan. It's a Chinese influence, and works like this are still being made today, but we also see the work of superstars like Ito Hidehito and the great king of celadon, Kawase Shinobu. There's this poetic forms. Minegishi, the late Minegishi. And of course, Fukami Sueharu, another king of celadon. His works are in the Met. This is about a meter wide. It's hollow, and he's known for his gradation of color, going from deep blue to light blue. Excuse me. Kyoto is a main center of ceramic production, and they didn't use porcelain, but they used a white stoneware. And there are a couple dozen famous potters in Kyoto whose works are still being emulated today. They were created not as works of art, but of production ware. So Nonomura created many of these, and they've been produced ever since. And you can walk the streets in the Kiyomizu district and look in pottery windows and still see pieces like this. One of the great artists of all times, ceramic artists, was Ogata Kenzan, and he added for extraordinary works to the world of food presentation. His works are still being used today in high-end kaiseki restaurants. Kutani ware is an area in Kanazawa, produced from about the 1700s, and functional ware, vivid colors. They focus on red, yellow, green, purple, and Prussian blue. And the living national treasure a few years ago was the late Tokuda Yasukichi III. He took overglazed enamels to probably the highest level to date. The technology, his methodology was extraordinary, and he just blew everyone out of the picture in terms of that. He became a living national treasure. And another great Kutani artist working in the 20th century is Nakamura Takuo. His works are all over the world in museums in the metropolitan New York, et cetera, et cetera. So a big thing happened. After 350 years, they brought back the tunnel kiln. In the 1960s, they brought it back. It took 10 years to figure out how to do it because no one had seen one in 350 years. And so, of course, many of the works I've shown you so far marked SS were done in tunnel kilns. Since the 1960s, Japan is in its second golden age. So we are now living in the second golden age of ceramics in Japan. And so Shino ware had disappeared for 300 years. Many people had never even seen it, and they began to produce it again since the 1960s. Ryuichi Kakurezaki, he's one of the greatest potters in Japan. He's from Bizen, and I believe he's in your upcoming exhibition on Bizen. You have to go see him. He's breaking all of the stereotypes, as did Harada Shoroku, another great Bizen potter, all using the tunnel kiln. And Koyama Yasuhisa, he was one of the people who he discovered the kiln after 10 years of experimentation. Not using a tunnel kiln, but one of the great superstars would be of this golden age would be Kitamura Junko, one of the earlier female artists who've led the way for many female artists to come forward. Hiro Ajiki. Mihara Ken, again, not a tunnel kiln, but extraordinary artist in this new era of superstars. Sakiyama, I mean, what can we say? It's just breathtaking. So thank you to Joan Mervis Gallery, New York, Katie Jones Gallery in London, Ippodo Gallery, New York and Tokyo for letting us use many of your slides. Robert Yellen Gallery in Kyoto for being a mentor of mine many years. And of course, the great Motoki Sakai, the head of the Japan Ceramics Association and publisher of Kosetsu magazine. So back to you, Aki-san.
Well, Steve, I don't know if you can see me, if people can see me or hear me. Can you hear me?
I can see you, yes. You
You can
changed
see
the
me.
profile, I think, since the last time I saw you.
Okay. Okay. Well, what can I say, Steve? I mean, thank you so very much for the presentation. I mean, another tour de force presentation, taking us on a great journey, basically, reviewing the kind of cross-section of amazing landscape of traditional Japanese pottery, as well as contemporary stuff as well, just going across different regions. I mean, actually made me want to take a huge journey, you know, a huge trip across going across different regions of Japan, like some of the places, Shigaraki, Tokoname, Bizen, Echizen, Tamba, and of course Mino, those six ancient kilns, plus some of the lesser known areas that you also mentioned. I mean, I'm really surprised how you are able to cram everything in within mere 43, 44 minutes. So yeah, it's just incredible. But this is only, like you said, at the very outset of your presentation, it's only scratching the surface, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it could have gone on for hours on end, and I wouldn't have been bored at all, actually. And I'm sure many of the viewers were feeling the same way. And I know your timing is also very tight. So we'd like to use the remainder of the program for Q&A as people are sending in their questions. But, you know, since this iteration is the last of its series, I wonder if I can exercise the moderator's exclusive right, per se, to ask the first question as a kind of primer. I was going to ask you maybe, you know, like a favorite craft or something like that. But since you have really compelled all of us, you know, to want to take a great journey looking at different, you know, pottery producing regions, and maybe perhaps start building one's own collection. I wonder, since you mentioned a lot about kind of caliber and prominence of each of these different artists that you introduced, and also regional characteristics, what to look out for, how would one go about starting to build his or her own Japanese pottery collection, would you say? What would be, you know, one of some of your biggest advice?
Okay, that's a really good question. And you know, I was in the tour business for many years and I
Mhm.
did ceramics tours. And you know, we would arrive in a town and near the train station, we would arrive in Hagi, let's say. Near the train station, there are all kinds of shops selling inexpensive things. Very nice,
Mhm.
expensive. And people got off the train, they just couldn't wait to go to those really inexpensive things. And I said, don't even look at them.
Mm.
Let's go to the top people. Let's see the best of the best that's being made. Create your own reference point, and then go to see the inexpensive things. But see the best first, so you know what the range of possibility is. So that's what I would suggest to people, for people. Just, instead of going on and looking at some sites that sell inexpensive things online, go to look at the things that they're showing at the Metropolitan, or at the Joan Mervis Gallery, at the Katie Jones Gallery, or at the Ippodo Gallery online. See their exhibit, see on over and over, because they change their exhibitions all the time, and get a feel for that. Go to your exhibition at the Portland Garden with fantastic work, and see the best of the best. And then you start to see, if you see something inexpensive, you'll have a discernment. Is that something of value, or is that just something that was knocked off and it's cheap?
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, we see questions coming through actually. So let me get to the first one. Yeah, this one is from Joyce. What was um was there any Chinese influence on Japanese pottery? I think you mentioned very, very quickly in terms of foreign influence on Japanese pottery to begin with. But can you elaborate a little bit about Chinese influence on Japanese pottery?
Oh, yeah, so much. Well, of course, Celadon
Mm-hmm.
and porcelain had a huge, and blue and white. That's a huge Chinese influence right there. It was a huge Chinese influence. And Chinese were doing celadons in the 900s, and the Japanese didn't do them till the 1600s. So
Mm,
they had, and Japanese were importing these works. So people knew them, they loved them, they had in their DNA, they'd seen them so much, especially in the upper classes, that they had that sensibility. And so the Chinese created a kind of a holy grail, and took a long time to come up to that level. And the Japanese did come up to the level, and they've expanded on that. But yes, there was a huge Chinese influence. But much of Korean had a Chinese influence. So much of what I said is Korean. I think a lot of that was Chinese influence via Korea.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Another question. Yeah, is yeah, it's concerning raku ware.
Yes.
That you touched upon in your presentation as well. This person says, when I think of Japanese ceramics, I immediately think of raku. It seems that it is very common in the United States as well. What is the difference between raku in Japan and raku in the States?
I
Raku.
love that question.
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone comes to Japan, and they say, well, the first thing they want to see, I want to see rakuware. And
Mm-hmm.
first of all, okay, it's pronounced, for those of you not aware, it's pronounced in America raku. So
Mm-hmm.
raku, but there's American raku and there's Japanese raku, and it's really quite different. Japanese raku it's a very narrow focus, mostly tea bowls, mostly for and in a tea event, there'll probably be only one rakubo used, even in a large event. Um, and it's just along a certain prescribed production procedures. American raku is, they'll use color. They'll after during the firing process, they will place the bowl in the piece in a low combustible in a low combustion environment to lower the oxygen. So maybe in leaves or in some fallen leaves, they'll put it in that to create this low oxygen effect. They'll use colors, they'll use all kinds of shapes. So it's a very different thing. It's a lot of fun to do raku. And sometimes even in Japan, clubs will make things, ceramics clubs will do things with raku, but in Japan, it's just basically tea bowls. And they don't do that after firing combustion environment to
Mm-hmm.
produce certain effects. So that's why a lot of raku in America looks kind of has a very like a texture to it, and in Japan it's always glazed. It's a glazed finish.
Excellent. Be mindful of time here as well. But we're gonna get probably be able to get to two more questions actually, including the one coming from Renee. The other one coming from Anne Pittman. I think we're gonna be able to address this in Steve's concluding remarks because it talks about what other cultural forms that Japan Crafts 21 actually promotes other than ceramic art and various other stuff that we've been introducing. And so the one from Rene is about uh, resurgence of or renewed interest in ceramics in the United States, almost akin to what happened in the 60s and 80s. Is Japan experiencing a renewed interest in clay by younger artists today? That's the question to you.
Japan has a huge population of potters, and there is quite an interest in pottery, in ceramics in Japan, especially. I think women have come forward where they hadn't come forward in the past. It was very difficult for a woman to be an apprentice for 10 years for someone if she ever wanted to have a family. If it was a very difficult thing, and it was also maybe a male-dominated world. But since the war, the universities, especially since the war, but mostly in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we see the university systems, they've really have great ceramics departments. And so many of the women we see prominent now as superstars came from the university system. So I think that if you go to a university in a ceramics department, an art university, you'll see maybe even half the people or more sometimes are women. And but there are a lot of young people going into this. I mean, it's like going to a buffet. It's like the hugest buffet table on the planet, and it's like everywhere you go, they're one week or 5-day exhibitions everywhere, and lots of young people.
Great to hear that. Yeah, great to hear. And it's actually spreading across different cultural forms as well. And again, being mindful of our program time as well. And, also knowing that many of the viewers are actually tuning in from our home city of Portland, I wanted to also quickly turn the viewers' attention on the forthcoming art exhibition featuring a great facet of Japanese ceramic tradition, something that Steve mentioned in his presentation, which is Bizen ware, part of the what makes the 6 ancient kilns in Japan. Yeah, so Steve, thank you so much for showing this poster image to everyone. So Bizen ware is one of Japan's oldest and most esteemed styles of pottery, originating in Bizen province, which is modern-day Okayama prefecture between Osaka and Hiroshima. And this will be showing in February, actually starting on the 8th of February next year. This actually does draw upon a private collection of David Schneider and Naomi Pollock. And through their generosity, this exhibition has been put together to run from February 8th through June 9th next year. I'm really super excited actually to be able to host this exhibition at Portland Japanese Garden. Yeah, so it's sad to say, but this is really it, Steve. We are coming to the end of our programmatic journey together. Do you have any last thoughts or comments that you'd like to share from Kyoto? Also, bearing in mind that there was a question from this person earlier about what other cultural forms that Japan Crafts 21 promotes.
Well, thank you. Well, we are promoting that which, so in addition to what we mentioned, within our group of craft leaders who, from our contest winners of the past 4 years, we are actively promoting their work. And there's kubihimo, silk cord making, there's all kinds of textile procedures, there's dyeing, there's all kinds of lacquer ware. We promote a lot with lacquer ware. And I hesitate to use the word lacquer because Japanese urushi is not lacquer. It's a rarefied coating. But if we call it Japanese urushi lacquer, we might get by with that. So we have many different things, and also one example, one of our latest winners produces textiles from linden bark, from trees in deep forests, in the way that Japanese produced textiles 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. There's this group of 10 people in a village of 40 people stuck in a mountain in Niigata, and they're producing exquisite textiles. So we're all over the place, but I'd like to just go back to offering Japan Craft 21 as an opportunity to learn about these things. We want to keep working with Portland to bring this information to you. If you go to our website, we would love to have you join. You can join for just a nominal amount, or you can join for a large amount. We accept donations, but all this goes for promoting and for expanding and saving 1,954 master crafts from the top of Hokkaido to the bottom of Okinawa. This is our mission, even though we're only at about 20 crafts so far in that mission. So please join us, donate, and be part of our activities.
Excellent. Yeah, well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, this is really the end of our programmatic journey together. But I gotta say that we are thinking of ways to make this webinar an ongoing part of our virtual program offering, actually, with Japan Crafts 21. So please do keep watching the space. Till next time, please do take care, and we wish you very happy holidays wherever you might be tuning in from tonight or today or this afternoon. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Aki.